BOA Shot from Henry Stewart Events, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's webinar, Breaking the Cycle of Overworked Creative Teams, How Are You Getting On? Kindly sponsored by EKCS. During the session, please send through your questions at any point using the questions box on your GoToWebinar side panel. Also, a reminder that the recording of this session will be sent to you tomorrow, so you can view it again at your own pace. Now, it's my great pleasure to pass you over to Michael Storey and Robert Berkeley from EKCS. Thank you, and over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Teo, and thank you everybody for attending this webinar. Backed by popular demand, right, Michael?
I think so, but by twice popular demand. I think we've done 2 talks, and now we're doing a webinar so that we can go into a deeper dive on all of this stuff.
Have we touched a nerve or found a rich seam?
I think we have. I think we've had a lot of feedback after the 2 talks that we gave. This is clearly a topic which I think is affecting a lot of people. It's something that we've done surveys, as we'll talk about as well, and that's really borne out in the numbers that we're seeing.
Okay, and just to be clear, we're not medical professionals, but
very far from that.
But experienced management professionals, perhaps.
Only just creative professionals, in my case.
Indeed, indeed.
Right.
So on with the show.
Okay. So let's move across. So let's just quickly talk about what we've got here. So the format of the webinar is that we're going to talk about overwork first. We're going to talk about defining that and what that is specifically, move on to burnout, recognizing those signs of burnout, and then we'll move into what we can do about it. And I think we'll spend the bulk of the webinar talking about that, about the fixes, about the tactics, about the things that you can put in place. We'll then wrap up. There's time for Q&A. And then there's a reading list at the end if we get to it. If we don't, we'll just share it afterwards. So it's okay if we don't get to that bit. Okay, so let's just start. I'd love to start by just explaining who we are and why we're sort of qualified to talk to you today about overwork and burnout. So let's start with explaining about EKCS.
Sure. Well, for those of you who don't know, EKCS is in the business of helping creative teams perform at their very best, by which I mean enabling them to focus on the creative and the strategy. If you're an in-house agency, being close to the brand and being able to fill your thoughts with improving the creativity of what you do. So we do that by harnessing our production expertise, automation, now of course AI-driven tools that we use as a matter of course, and essentially take away a lot of the things that go after the big idea and after the great strategic kind of leap. We'll handle the rest of it so that you can then carry on focusing on that.
Fantastic, thank you. All right, shall we tee you up? No?
Let's do it. Let's a very quick summary of me. I'm Robert Berkeley, and I'm the co-founder of EKCS. And actually there's a podcast interview with me that's just dropped. Anyone who wants to know the backstory of EKCS, go and listen to Smart Agency Masterclass. They get a potted history of the company and my career as well. But I'm working here with great people like Michael, who can speak much more knowledgeably about the topic in hand.
And that was my performance review. And then over to me. So I was a creative for a long time. I started out as a copywriter and a journalist. I ended up running a content publishing agency, so I was managing editor of that, helped to found it. I then ran my own copywriting business, and then after some time I ended up heading up the creative team at Ocado, and that got to be about 45 people in size. It's a fast changing business, so we dealt with all aspects of growth, change, dealing with workload, and I learned a lot of what I'll talk to you about today there.
So this was a tech company, but also a grocery
e-commerce company,
delivery, e-commerce.
You don't get much quicker.
You were in startup mode, and it was led by a team from McKinsey who didn't take no prisoners. Is that right?
Just the pace is relentless. The investors need growth. You're dealing with customers. The whole thing is just geared up for change, growth, development. So we had to pivot all the time, and obviously as a result of that, you're very busy. So some of the things that we'll talk about here definitely apply to my career history.
All right, so let's
shall we dive in?
Yeah, let's dive straight in then.
Okay, so let's start by defining overwork, and we've done a couple of surveys on this topic recently. We did one in October, and then we've done another one in March. And I mean, this just sort of said it to me that 46% of in-house leaders in the UK said that poor planning was their biggest challenge. 39% saying workload. That's a lot of people. I mean, you know, there's clearly a problem here. Let's talk about the definition of overwork. So I looked it up. It's to cause someone to work beyond their capacity or strength. So really not just talking about being busy here. Everyone should be busy, you know, that's part of the job. But if you're doing more than your hours, or you're working in a more intense way than is sustainable, we would call that overwork.
So it's not like a medically defined thing.
No, definitely not. You know, when you talk about overwork, it's not medical. It's just a term that we use for saying too much work. Like clues in the name, isn't it?
Right. Okay. So what's the challenge?
So again, I mean, we did a survey earlier this month, and we asked people just to name the single biggest factor that causes overwork. You can see the answers here. You know, tight deadlines come out top. No surprises to anyone who's worked in a creative team. Unclear or changing briefs. All of these, I mean, you can read these for yourself, but these 6 things, these are things that I would imagine every creative team is battling with.
I can feel the nods coming through the camera here right
definitely.
now.
I mean, see, when you give the talk, you can hear the murmurs, can't you?
You can.
Yeah, so obviously this then has ramifications. You know, you end up with teams that are just overloaded, that just actually, in the case of creative teams, are not doing brilliant creative work because you can't. You're just slammed. You're just trying to get it out the door.
No matter how good you are, right?
Yeah, you're literally just forking the work out the door as fast as you can do it. And then that has ramifications as well to you as a person, you as a team, you as a brand. So here they are.
So how do you recognize this, Michael?
I mean, I've got a photograph somewhere of my diary in one of my previous roles, you know, when you've got your Google Calendar up, and it looks like this really. You've got triple book meetings and things like that.
That's a warning flag right there.
Right. Everybody's just 110% or more. You find that productivity does go down, or the quality goes down, as I said before. Actually, increased churn. So when I say that, I mean, people move on. People just don't stick around. And you find that your recruitment policy is a revolving door, that you're constantly dealing with.
So you get good people, but you can't retain them because
they're part of the cycle of just, right, I can't take it anymore. I'm going to move on. I'm going to go somewhere else. And then that leads to health problems and that morale, really. So let's talk about burnout, because I think overwork leads to burnout in a lot of cases. And this was horrifying. I just did not expect this from our survey. 100% of respondents said that they'd witnessed burnout in their team.
On their team.
Honestly, I got a lump in my throat when I saw that. It is a common problem. So what is burnout? So I went and looked it up in the World Health Organization classification, and it's classed as an occupational phenomenon. So it's not a medical.
So that's not a medical condition
it's
either.
Absolutely not, which is why we can talk about it, because we're not medical people and stuff. But I mean, you don't need me to read it out, but you can see from the description here the words chronic, energy depletion, increased mental distance. You know, this is people just running at a low ebb or just burning out entirely, just can't work. In some cases they end up going off work. And so just to make the last point as well, this is an occupational thing. It doesn't apply to other parts of your life. So we're only talking about burnout as a result of work.
I'll be really interested in the comments or the questions if anyone has not seen this, because we were very surprised by this survey result.
Okay, so just wanted to summarize, what is the scale of the problem? This is enormous. I'm not going to read every single stat out here, but you know, you got stats about employees burning out in the current job. You got ones about working parents meeting the criteria for burnout. Like, this is society. This is bigger than just creative teams. This is everybody is suffering from this. 71% of Britons feel tired more than half of the time. I mean, I'm 50. I feel tired all the time.
You look great for 50 though, Michael.
Thanks, it's the beard. But these numbers are high. And look at that, over half of US workers are taking less time off than they're entitled to. That they wouldn't be doing that if they weren't working too hard.
I mean, it's all starting to sound rather hopeless, right? This is you know.
Beautifully teed
something
up.
that we can't, what you mean?
And of course, you can do something about it. So
Okay.
we asked people to say what was happening, like to drill down a little bit more. Why did they think there was burnout happening in their team? And again, people working in creative teams will definitely recognize some of these. I've definitely worked in teams that have had these as features. A lack of good communication, and that could be like the briefing form. It could be just you too rushed to get, particularly in hybrid working, get on a call with each other. You're all just, you're doing it by chat. Everything's hurry, hurry, hurry. There's talk about the employees here not prioritizing well-being, the company not prioritizing well-being. We're going to that in a bit more detail later. And then actually, I thought this was an interesting one, misalignment between skill sets and work. And that touches a little bit on the fact that our workplaces are changing a lot, and that the skills that you were doing 5 years ago, that these might not be the skills that you're using in your current job, but you may not receive on-the-job training to do that. So people are sometimes scurrying to catch up with, I don't know, whether it's AI or whether it's just a new software package.
But because one of the signifiers of burnout is that they'll be losing perspective and going after things without much consideration as to whether it's the right thing to be pursuing.
Another job, all of a sudden this one's a video one. Well, I haven't really used video before, and all of a sudden you're thrown in there. You use,
but you got to do it. You got to make it happen.
Deadlines coming.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm glad to know that that they've just decided to cut the grass right outside the window.
They are cutting the grass, and the gentleman outside doesn't look like he's suffering from burnout.
He's not burned out at all. No, he's not.
Okay, so let's talk about burnout in your team. Talk about what signs you might see, and I'll recommend this book to you later. There's a brilliant book called Time to Breathe by a guy called Bill Mitchell, and he came in and he spoke to us at Ocado, to the senior leadership team of which I was part, and he made some brilliant points. It's all about staying well, about staying in the right place in a busy modern working environment. And when you look down through this list here, like, okay, you might not see every single one of these signs in every single person, but where you do see it, you need to start asking questions. You need to be aware of it, particularly as a manager. And I'll come on to the role of the manager in a little bit. But just obviously you get this webinar afterwards. You can refer back to this. I wanted to just give you some prompts here that you can use in future. So let's move on to our own example. So are we as creative leaders setting a good example? And you see the stat there, 70% of in-house leaders in the UK said in-house pressure and time to be creative with their biggest creative challenges. I know that from my own experience. You're busy all the time. You're busy, you're dealing with, you're running a department, you're running a team, you're getting things done. I'm not sure that we all look after ourselves.
You are a creative as well. Yeah. So you weren't even getting the chance to do the thing.
No, and that's the first thing to go. So, we'll sort of cover this in a bit more detail. But yeah, the creativity is the first thing that you don't have time for because you're focusing on running your team. But actually then sometimes you don't even have time to run your team as well as you'd like because you're so busy just meetings, things to do, which is too much to do. So let's talk a little bit more about setting a good example. So, again, Bill Mitchell, it was a brilliant prompt for me here to get me looking at myself and the role that I was playing. Was I setting the right example to my team? Well, I did feel under expectation to deliver, and rightly so.
What were the sort of behaviours you were exhibiting?
Well, I'll come on to it because some red flags in a minute, and I think they really kind of lay out. I definitely was displaying a few of those, but you can feel quite isolated as a creative leader because you don't really do the same job as the rest of the business. A lot of the time, the rest of the business is revenue generation or, gaining new customers, doing sales. And quite often you're one removed from that.
Yeah, in an in-house team, you're unlike in an agency where you are the product.
You are the golden goose, really.
Yes.
You're one removed from that, really. Yeah. And so you can sometimes just feel like nobody else in the organization quite understands your world, you and your creatives. And that can be quite a lonely place. And then that last point there, I think for many creative leaders, they're learning on the job. Nobody really teaches you how to run a department when you're doing your design degree. So all of a sudden you land in there and this is quite a new environment, and all of a sudden it's not about how good a creative leader you are, it's how good a leader of people you are. And that can be a really different
skill
thing.
Different skill for sure.
Okay, so we all recognize this cartoon. So you asked me, what was I noticing in myself? I definitely set myself a really horrible bar. I wanted to succeed in that role, and I was lucky. I did it for, I think, something like 12 years or something, which is an immensely long time to be head of a team in one organization. And I drove myself onwards.
So this wasn't like this. You were like this from the start. It was a boiling frog sort of situation.
I
grew
notice. Mentally into the role, like for better or worse.
Yeah.
And you do feel very responsible. You talk about the work not getting done. Well, you really know what that means. You know what that means to your stakeholders and your peers and everyone else in the organization. I was very critical on myself, and I did feel sometimes, particularly when I first took the team over, that there wasn't anyone else to do it. You're shaping your team, and you do feel like that's all on you. I mean, I was very lucky by the end that I had some terrific people reporting into me, and they were able to get on and run their areas really brilliantly.
If they're coming to you with solutions, not problems, that's the ideal thing. Yeah?
I mean, I was learning from them, and they're the best sort of people to have in your team. But definitely early doors, particularly, you can just feel like you're the only person. And I've definitely spoke to creative leaders like that in the past year who feel like they're Atlas, really.
Yeah.
Okay,
it's
so
a classical reference. I like me.
Yeah, what with the world on your shoulders? Yeah, that should be
or
on
Sisyphus.
Get creative. Yeah, I used to have that as a screensaver. Sisyphus pushing his rock up the hill. Okay, so you asked me about red flags. Well, here are some red flags, and again, with thanks to Bill Mitchell for making me think about this stuff. Was I starting to notice this? Yeah, I definitely was. Bill Mitchell again does this thing, this well-being wellness index, I think he calls it. Might have the name wrong, but where you track your diet and your sleep and the exercise, the amount of time you're seeing people, and just doing things like even going and sitting in nature or whatever, and checking whether you're getting enough of that in your life, or are you in balance. I definitely wasn't. I thought I was doing a good job, but of course, if you're not looking after yourself, you're probably not in a great place to then look after your team.
Because you're losing perspective and you're not having time to think, and so therefore how can you be thinking about them?
Exactly that. And actually, I'll come on to it as well. What kind of role model are you? I use that to be a good example. If your team's seeing you message at midnight, what do they think the norm is?
Yes, although you might be responding to what is coming from your hierarchy as well, right?
Yeah, and at some point, I used to use this phrase a lot, you have to be the shit umbrella. And you have to stop this stuff from raining down on your team. And actually, if you're raining emails in at them at midnight, you'd be more of a colander, aren't you, than a shit umbrella, I think, to mix my metaphors. Okay, so let's just wrap up this little bit by saying most creative leaders work more than their set hours.
Did he work for you, Kipple Norton?
Kipple Norton, well, he enhanced shareholder value. That's how we remember him. The point of that cartoon is to just say, look, great, you did your job, you added value to the business, but
no one's going to remember you for
cares,
that.
Right?
No, okay.
Live your life and look after yourself and look after your team.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on. We've talked about the individual, the creative leader, us. Now let's talk about our teams and how we
So there's something we can do.
There's shed loads we can do.
Excellent.
So, and one of them here is in this Gallup poll that was done a few years ago. That actually a little bit of self-determination makes a huge amount of difference. It's that feeling of control. I know I definitely thrive in a workplace where I feel a little bit more in control.
Giving autonomy.
Right, of course, it's natural, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we asked our survey respondents in March to suggest how they would create a healthier work environment, and these were the three answers. Really,
that looks a bit like our office door, that does, doesn't it?
Well, actually, we should put that on our. I think it would be a joy, wouldn't it? A wow place.
Yeah, make me smile like the gentleman there.
But none of these feel like rocket science. Setting more realistic expectations. Wow, 4 out of 10 people wanted to see that. Implementing flexible working. We've had this conversation since COVID. This is not news to us.
No.
And then investing in additional resources, by which they mean making sure your team's the right size to deliver on expectations. So this is where we come in as leaders. We define the working hours. We set clear start and end times for the workday. Have to lead by example on this stuff. Encourage breaks. And honest to God, I know there's at least one person on the webinar who was part of.
There is at least one person on the webinar.
Yes, there definitely is. who was part of one of my previous teams, and will have seen me not really setting this example as I should have done. I didn't take breaks. I used to have lunch at my desk or whatever, you know. And what does that say? Or again, sending messages at weekends or over holidays. You think you're doing what's needed, but actually you're setting a terrible example, because you just make it feel like work is 24/7. Other things you can do: talk about flexibility in work hours, remote work options, and you know, I mean, I don't want to talk about EKCS too much, but actually it makes life much easier for us that Robert trusts us to be where we need to be. If you need to be with the client, you make that decision. Go be with the client.
The review's coming very well,
Yes. And then, you know, take time off. It's always sad, and I was always one of those people that was hurrying to take my holiday in July and August. Our cut-off was 31st of August, and I would be trying to panic taking leave, you know, in August when everyone else is trying to take it, and just not really giving myself the breaks I needed. And also, as a boss, you need to be sharing information on mental health and well-being, and it is out there. Your HR team, if you're in a large
can I put a shout out? So for a podcast I host, Inside Jobs, which you can find on any podcasting app. Inside Jobs is where I interview creative leaders from around the world, and one of those, talking about mental health, was Carol Feely from Innocent. And I would suggest anyone who's interested in this area, go and take a listen to the interview that I did with Carol Feely, because her approach to this and that of Innocent generally as a company is really progressive, very refreshing, and full of ideas. So yeah, Inside Jobs is the podcast, and the Carol Feely interview. They're all excellent, of course, and the most recent one I think is particularly good. But Carol Feely's is very good in this regard.
I think that's great, and they've done some great stuff there. But every company will be doing positive thing, or should be doing positive thing. We had mental health first aiders at Ocado, for example. There are lots of things that, you know, there are resources there. And I think the other thing you can do as a boss is to foster a positive work environment. And honestly, I thought I did that well some of the time, and then sometimes you get into that trap of let's get it done. Have we done it yet?
So what made you realise that perhaps you hadn't done it as well as you thought?
I think just reflection. I think sometimes you have to be out of that situation to almost look at it and say, well, do you know, was I taking that too seriously? Well, you can never take work too seriously, but, you know, are you too much enclosed in it? And I felt sometimes I probably was. So I think it's taking that step back, being open in your communication, talking about your workload. I think the one caveat that I'd make about that is, if you're the boss, you've got to be careful where you're talking about your own workload and stress. And it isn't really, for me, it's not with your team, it's with your peers or with your boss or with somebody away from your team. Because I think if you start telling your team how busy you are, I think it just crosses the boundaries a little bit. And it can make them worried as well. And it's something that somebody came up to me after this talk that we gave in LA and said that they worry about their boss, and therefore they work harder to protect their boss, but then their boss was working harder and harder to protect the team, and you can end up in this really bad cycle. So you know.
So you mentioned team building activities there. People scoff at team building activities, but they work, don't they?
I think they do. I think the only caveat I'd put on that is, with creative teams, the danger is sometimes that you normalize overwork, and that you're all in it together, so you all work late together, and that isn't particularly helpful. But definitely being able to talk to your team well is, you know, hey, could you send that over? Or, hey, I'm not nagging, but could I get that off you? And so having
mutual
those proper mutual respect and
so radical candor, but with mutual respect.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Let's also talk about empowerment, and we touched on this in an earlier slide. I think it's really important to ask our teams their opinion. If they're also working hard, why don't you ask them? I found, particularly when I had a very large department, was that you're sometimes just a little bit away. But you don't manage everybody in your team anymore. You indirectly manage them. It's really important that everybody in the department's got a voice and is being heard. And the other thing is, just speaking amongst friends here, you then play it back to them when you fixed it, and that's really powerful, because then they hear that they said something and you did it,
and there's a degree of control, and
it builds trust. And part of this is that they trust you to fix things, and that says to them, you know, you brought it to me, I've fixed it.
As opposed to making a promise that you don't fulfill.
That you can't
losing
fulfill
credibility.
sometimes. Delegate improvements to the team. If the team care about this, they will also run with this. And rather than you feeling like you're responsible for fixing everything for the whole department, quite often they're better at it, or they're best placed to do it. Or actually, they've just got a bit more bandwidth than you because you're doing everything else. So do delegate, and then it's a team effort. But remember that you own the overall problem. So you have a unique role as the leader. The team can't fix it all for themselves. Keep them updated on progress, and you've seen it there. Don't promise what you can't deliver. Okay.
Yeah, the last point on that slide was don't moan. Was it don't moan downwards?
Yeah.
This is it's very tempting sometimes, isn't it?
And
especially when you're the leader of a team and you think that they trust you and you want to build that rapport with them, is you might overshare.
Bloody marketing, God, they always sent that briefing form and stuff. And actually, what are they hearing when they hear you say that? They hear you saying that you can't fix it either. Whereas what they really want to hear you say is, I hear there's a problem with the briefing form. I've seen it for myself. Don't worry, it's on the radar. We should have that fixed within a couple of weeks, for example. That's a much better response.
And you also end up developing an us and them, which is always very tempting to create an us and them environment, but
easiest place to do it, and it's the wrong thing.
Leads to it's hiding to nothing. Yeah,
I think it absolutely does. So let's just kind of recap.
More positivity.
I think more positivity, but not being entrenched in us and them. And there may be problems between teams. I think if you're consistently getting poor quality briefs, it's pretty miserable. And I'll come on to that in a minute. But that doesn't mean that you need to create this sort of tribalism, because you probably won't fix it that way.
No.
So just to recap here, it's about trust, and it's about people looking at you and seeing you as the person that's driving this stuff. Okay.
By the way, with tribalism, what I always found was the best common enemy is not a department within your company, but is actually possibly your competitor.
No, that's a nice way of putting
it. That's where I'd always try and focus people.
I think it can just be hard sometimes in house because it does get quite interdepartmentally,
Yes.
And you've got to
rise
rise above it, I think. Yeah. And that was one of to go off on a bit of a tangent. It was one of the biggest lessons that I learned. I think was learning in the end that I wasn't the head of a team. I was actually part of my boss's crew, and my job was to go and work with the other members of my crew, and go and fix things amongst ourselves, and then bring them back to my department. Okay, so ensuring a manageable workload. I mean, this is crazy, isn't it? 46% of creatives report spending between 3 to 7 hours. That's like practically a working day every week on admin.
Yeah.
And I know creatives particularly hate it, but if you think about what you're paying creatives to do, to add value through brilliance, through idea generation, through synthesizing thoughts, asking them to, chase briefs and be mini project managers, just isn't a good use of their time. So we talked a little bit earlier about tribalism. I think the most important thing you can really do is go out of the creative cave, as I call it, and go out there and go and speak to the rest of the business and find out what the people who are putting work into you and your team, what do they need from you? Are you aligned? And I'll come on to the kind of work that you should be doing in a minute, but are they getting what they need from your team? And if so, how is that relationship working? If they think they're putting in great briefs and then they're coming back, you're sending questions back every time, tackle it, get to the bottom of that disconnect, try and work it out, because that will be killing your team's time every time they do a piece of work, and it makes them miserable and it makes your stakeholders miserable. And then agree those ways of working with the stakeholders. I put here, this is almost certainly your number one priority. There's almost nothing you can do which will fix overwork better than fixing your flow of work in from your stakeholders.
Right. So, but how do you have control over that realistically, Michael? When you're working with the marketing department, say if you're an in-house agency, and the work will just come pouring in, and it's not the marketer's concern how well you're coping with it; they just want results.
I always say that it's always everything is about what's in it for the other person. And I think the success that you have is not chastising and berating people. And I've fallen out with people in the past over the quality of maybe the request they're putting into the team. that is never really changed anything sustainably. What does is talking to them about how they can get more what they want. What do they want? They want really good work from you and they want more of it. So you can give them that, but in return, you need to ask this from them. So
like any negotiation,
it's a
right?
transaction, it's a negotiation.
Okay.
What can they give you? What can you give them?
Because they have to understand you're not an infinite, you're not an infinite resource.
No, unless they can pay for it, and nobody ever can. There's never that money. So it's like, look, how can we do more with what we've got? Well, you could start by making the briefs comprehensible for a start, for example. Okay, and then in return, we won't sit on it for a week before we come back and say we can't work on it, for example. And it's just a negotiation. And I would prioritize those key touch points when you're dealing with other departments. So the briefing, the kickoff, prioritization of work, the sign off and feedback. These are the times when you can't fix it all yourself, because you need to interact with another department. Go prioritize those guys, and then get it in writing and talk about it a lot. Say it verbally, but make sure it's written down somewhere and refer back to it and update people. Tell people how well it's going. Whatever you've agreed, tell them in 3 months how well it's going and all the successes. Okay, let's talk a little bit about that previous point about prioritization. And I mean, these are so easily said. I found, set realistic goals, prioritize tasks. Oh, great. It sounds so generic, but actually lots of in-house creative leaders don't really get their hands dirty with this. This isn't really the area where they want to play. They want to be leading brilliant work.
Yes.
And changing the world through fantastic headlines and wonderful art direction and everything.
Well, that's what they're paid for. That's what they're paid for. That's why they're on the payroll.
It's what they were hired to do, because they were brilliant at it. But actually, the bit that's going to fix things for them and their team is quite often on this screen here. And if it isn't you, it's somebody in your team. Make sure you've got someone in your team who can help to deliver this stuff, or at least you have access, or you have some sort of control over it. Because the alternative is that just you, as a creative director or creative head, just ends up stuck trying to prioritize tasks when you're not very good at doing it, and that can be quite cataclysmic sometimes.
Absolutely.
So make sure, whether it's you or whether it's someone else, that someone is filtering and fielding and sifting and organizing and working with the stakeholders and prioritizing, because then actually your creatives can get on with the work.
Someone you can lean on and trust.
I think so. I mean, I would say, with respect to the creatives are so valuable in your team, because without them you haven't got a good output. But your studio manager or your project manager is just the gift from God to a creative head. All right, so the next question you really need to be asking yourself as well, we've talked about talking to your stakeholders. You've also got to think about yourself as well. What do you want your team to be famous for? And when I say this, what I mean is, what is the right size for the team, and what work should they be doing to add maximum value? Because no good thinking yourself that you're going to build an ad agency within your organization if nobody else thinks that's what you should be doing, that you should be cutting out banners. So work that out, speak to your stakeholders, speak to your direct reports, and have a plan, have a vision for what this team's going to be doing. And I would say, you look at automations, look at ways that you can shave time, train other departments to use desktop publishing packages. I mean, we brought in Canva at Ocado, and we trained people who'd been asking us to do HR documents or posters or, Christmas party invites or whatever. We set up templates and we ran regular clinics so that they could then go and serve themselves, but with a little bit of support from us. So we knew that the templates were on brand. They could do the work themselves. And ultimately, it just wasn't high enough value for us to be doing it in the creative department. Get rid of it. And then I think the last point here is outsource specialized or routine work. And I know we're sitting here working for a global creative services agency, right? So we're going to say this stuff. But actually, when I did this, I found it really effective. What I found was having junior people cutting out banners when they just walked in, they had a design degree, they were incredibly talented, and then we're just giving them 200 banners to do, and you're like, well, that's your job, and there's another 200 when you've done those. It's not what they want to do. They don't enjoy it. They're maybe not highly skilled enough to be doing this stuff repetitively every day. You really need someone who's been doing it a long time. go and find those people, and quite often that's offshore or it's outsourced. Make sure that the team, your in-house team, is the mothership for creative or brand excellence.
And that they have oversight, that they have kind of editorial control, as it were.
Absolutely.
But they don't have to do the work themselves, especially the routine and rote stuff.
That's it. And that actually, that they're also going, there's a brilliant book called X Teams by a lady called Deborah Ancona, I think. And they talk about scouting in this book, about going out into the organization, talking to people, finding out what problems they have, say in the trading team or in the, I don't know, the merchandising team, and then bringing that back to the team and solving it. And you can generate quite a lot of new work, valuable added value work within your department that way. But something's got to go. You've got to make some room. Nobody will just give you infinite
But
payroll.
you're there for the high value, high strategy work. Again, that's what you're recruited for. That's why you're an in-house agency in the case of Rand.
So make some room. Okay, and I think that wraps it up really. We've just got a conclusion here, which just we've covered a lot of ground, and obviously you guys on the webinar, you're going to get this to look back through. A collective effort will break the cycle of overwork. You can't do it all on your own. You need your team and you need your stakeholders as well. You should be clear about the work that's been done, be clear about realistic with the deadlines, provide adequate resource. And again, we're talking about, do you automate, do you delegate the work, do you offshore it, do you outsource it? Make sure your team are empowered. Show empathy. This is a really important point. Show empathy with your team. Tell them that you understand. When they tell you they're busy, tell them that you understand, but they are looking to you to fix it, not just to go, oh yeah, it's terrible, aren't we all busy? Well, they're telling you, go and fix it for them, and then create a healthy work culture. And you know, that starts with us as creative leaders. So that wraps up the main webinar bit. How are we doing for time? We've got 35 minutes.
Yeah, we're not good on time at the minute, and I think we've probably just got room for one question. It's we've had an amazing response. But
should we go to the reading list first then?
Why don't we do that, and then we'll do what we can with the questions.
And also, if you've not put a question in, there is time. We've got 20 minutes, so do check us questions if you want to. So let's just move on to the reading list. So I've recommended a few books here. They're all great. Got the 4-Hour Work Week. I'm not going to read them all out here. You can pick and choose yourself. There's 3 pages of different types of book. This one's self-improvement, so it's about you making the most of your time, making the most of your mentality. So these books will improve you, and of course there's lessons then for how you manage your team. And then the next 2 recommendations I talked about, Dr. Bill Mitchell's book Time to Breathe, brilliant book, and also Rest, Why You Get More Done When You Work Less. I mean, it's a great message, you know, says you should do less and actually the work you do will be higher quality, which is a brilliant message for creatives to hear. I definitely recommend both these books. And then the last one here, a guy called Cal Newport. I think he's actually a tech guy, I think, and he's written a bunch of books and they're all quite interesting. I mean, they all say the same thing. I'm not sure you need to read all 4, but I just like the 3 principles from Slow Productivity, which is the book that came out this year. Do fewer things, work at a natural pace, and obsess over quality. And I can't imagine there's a creative leader on here that wouldn't want to hear that. So they're my book recommendations. I mean, you're always welcome to message me on LinkedIn afterwards if you want me to recommend different things. You've got specialist titles, or send us a question now if you want.
Absolutely. Well, there's one that I'm on right now, which is written by a guy who ran one of the biggest creative teams going. He used to be the CEO of Havas in the UK. And if you haven't read No Bullshit Leadership, or the follow-up, which has just come out, No Bullshit Change, then get to it straight away as well, because those are fantastic guides. Yeah. So let's get on with the questions. As I say, we've got a lot of questions. We don't actually have that much time, but let me just pick a couple here. So Michael, we've got someone asking. We have several people working 1.5 to 2 people's worth of work. It's challenging to let your boss know that without sounding like complaining. So I think what the question is saying is that each person is doing 1.5 to 2 times the amount of work for that person. They want to go to their boss and they want to have a conversation about the fact that the team is completely overworked. There is too much work coming in. They don't know how to deal with it, but you don't want to sound like you're moaning. You want to come at it from a more positive way. So how would you manage a conversation like that is the question.
Well, I had that experience earlier on in my career, and obviously the numbers speak. So what we ended up doing, I was managing the copy team at the time, and we needed to get another copywriter. The existing copy team, myself included, we were doing between 45 and 60 hours a week. We were contracted to do 40, so we just wrote it down, and we just kept a spreadsheet. And that sounds niggly, but it's not, and it is worth it.
But can't you get challenged on productivity at that point then?
I mean, you
can put in the hours, but if you should be getting through the work in those hours. How do you benchmark the productivity?
Because I think you could also see the list of jobs that we're working on and how long we'd spent on them. So you could see that I mean, there was no question of the productivity. You could see there's 100 pieces of work being done, or whether it's a long time ago. I can't remember the exact number. We were smashed. You could see the tasks going through, but it's important that each one of those tasks is logged as a task, and then you're clear about putting your time against it. And in the end, we did manage to get that extra person. And okay, maybe this sounds like it's a bigger problem and it's a whole team, but the principle's the same. Start to write it down. And of course, like lots of people are using Monday.com or Workfront or other packages, software platforms which have got time tracking, and that's fine, but they might be going to someone else. They might be going to a studio manager or to the head. Nothing might be happening with them. Take control of it. And I don't think it's moaning is the other point.
But it's also a question of what is the work that those people are doing? Is that stuff that should be being outsourced? Is it stuff that they really, they should not be spending their time on doing? Because again, you recruited them to be creative, you recruited them to be on brand or be the brand, literally be the brand. And yet they're finding, when you've done this analysis, you're finding that they're doing work that they actually shouldn't be doing. They should be focusing on what they do best.
I think the danger with that slightly is that it forces the team to almost solutionize rather than just being able to come and say, look, do you know what, we're absolutely breathing out our asses here. We're doing kind of technical term. We're doing 60, 70 hours a week. You're trying to convince your boss that actually some of that work should go somewhere else. Well, actually, that's the boss's decision. I think that your first job is to just get it on their radar and to get them to accept responsibility for it. They might not be able to fix it immediately. Then might need to be a piece of work where you then scope out all of that work that's been done, talk to the business, work out whether it's actually priority, whether it's actually valuable. But the first thing is to capture it. Capture the work first, and then everything else comes from the end of it. But I tell you, without that proof, you just get, are you busy? We're all busy. We're all meant to be busy. You've got to break it down, and I don't see that as moaning. The only thing which is moaning is then going away with your team because you feel that your boss doesn't understand you, just grumbling about it.
So get away from the anecdotal and get onto the factual, and essentially start producing some dashboards. I guess we have this output, we've used this resource, and this is our capacity level, and you measure and monitor, and hopefully then you're armed with the information you need to perhaps encourage the boss to bring in an outsourcing partner or restructure the team or give you more headcount or more resource or whatever.
But again, that you can make this as simple as you like. It can just be a case of a piece of paper. It can be a spreadsheet. It can just be as simple as a few different columns. You don't have to go mad. This is just, what work did I do? How long did I spend doing it?
It should be in, if you've got a work management system of some sort, it should be in there as well.
And most people do now. I mean, there aren't many people still just doing it all through email these days.
No. Okay, so we have another question here, which is quite a long question, quite an interesting one. And again, we're not medical professionals, so I'll preface it with that. Do you think that with more awareness of neurodiversity, stress awareness, the sort of thing we're talking about, hybrid working, flexible working, is that having a positive outcome on leaders? And is it having a positive outcome on creative teams? Or is there still more culture changing that needs to be done? And I'm speaking to you now, really questioning you with your experience working with a number of our clients and getting stuck in with their in-house creative teams and seeing how they work, seeing how they've responded post-COVID to flexible working, to see how they're responding to this greater awareness and heightened awareness of mental health and neurodiversity as well.
So to summarize, the question is, have all these changes, are they then provoking a response from creative team leaders? Is that right?
I think so. And is there a positive, what is the positive response that there should be on that? Because it's a fact of life, right?
I mean, firstly, I think there was something in the question which sort of implied, have we done enough, or have we gone, you know, are we there and stuff? And of course, with all these things, you're never there, are you? It's always just a balance, and the balance shifts throughout time forever and ever. You never get the right balance. I'd say as leaders, we're more aware than we were probably even 5 years ago. And I don't just mean it in terms of COVID, you know, busting out in the world of remote work or hybrid working. But I think there is more understanding of neurodiversity. I think there is an approach to mental health, which I don't remember 10 years ago even. Has it had a positive impact? I guess it has.
In the sense that diversity has a positive impact, right?
I think it has, certainly in the people that I'm speaking to in our clients and their creative teams. Yeah, I would say so. Anecdotally, is it everybody? Not yet. I still think there's quite a lot of old school sort of
yes,
approaches.
I think you're right. I think there's a lot to learn and a lot to progress. Yeah.
And I think some of that's down to the individual and maybe the organisation they're working in. A lot of the time, it's down to that creative leader's manager as well. Like, are they prompting them? I've been very lucky. I've had very progressive managers in my career who've prompted me and encouraged me to, you know, understand the things that are coming in that are becoming more important, more talked about, more focused on than maybe they were, I don't know, when I started out my career sort of 25 years ago. But yeah, some of it's down to your company culture, some of it's down to your individual culture as a leader. I don't know, there's always, it's hard, it's a balance.
It's a good question, isn't it? It's a complicated question, but it's a good one.
That's one you could probably do about a 4-hour chat. It wouldn't even be a webinar, I don't think. It'd be a chat around over a drink, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So we got another question here, a somewhat more prosaic question. Now, you spend a lot of time working with our clients around certainly in the United States, in the United Kingdom as well, and your job very often is to help them focus on what they do best. And so the question that's come up here is, if there is outsourcing on the agenda for a team, that they need to be more productive, they need to do better work, more strategic work, then clearly outsourcing is the release valve that they need. How do you ensure that your team are happy with outsourcing and they're not worried about missing out on, well, their jobs, quite honestly, that it's not a huge threat to them?
Well, I was talking about this earlier in the week, actually, and we touched on this. We gave a webinar last month, I think, about outsourcing. And I think it comes back to a point I made about half an hour ago about you've always got to think about what's in it for the other person. And okay, talking to your team isn't quite a negotiation, but well, what would I say to a creative team if outsourcing was on the horizon? Would be, think of the stuff that you don't have to do. Does it mean that jobs will go away? Well, actually, I've worked in teams where this has been the case. If the job was a revolving door and it was a junior member of the team who was cutting up banners, and that's all they did, and when those banners were done, they did some more banners, and then they would leave after 6 months to a year.
Isn't this an apprenticeship? Isn't this a kind of apprenticeship that people should be used to?
I think it is if they want to be an apprentice and do that kind of work. But when they don't, and there's a mismatch between what they think they want to do and the reality of the job, you can't make people work for you. And then they just go and get another job somewhere else. And it's actually what we found in teams I've managed was that sort of repetitive work, particularly, nobody really wants to do it for very long. They just don't enjoy it. You know, resizing banners is not something that anybody really, a designer really wants to do for very long. And so what happens in the end is that, yeah, sure, you could say, well, you know, we're keeping somebody in a job, but that's a job that you're constantly recruiting for. And while you've got vacancies, when that person is quitting and then their replacement quits in a year, the rest of the team's under pressure because that work's still coming in and you're probably redistributing.
They're not as productive as they should be, yeah.
Right. So what's the message for people who might be faced with outsourcing? The creative manager sets the vision. and works on that with their manager or with other stakeholders, work out what the team should be famous for and make sure your team is the right size to do the right work. And create in-house creative teams should be adding value. They should be the mothership of the brand. They should be they should be custodians of the creative. Well, they're all things that I think are fun and positive and exactly what creatives want to be doing. That the work that they probably don't want to do, production work, routine, repetitive,
taking their ideas and then just churning out multiple versions
and then
of
doing the
them,
200
which
social
can be
media banners.
automated or whatever.
So I guess yes, you could say yes, that could lead to an adjustment in team size. But the most important thing is that you're doing the thought work and the added value within your team, and you're building your team's ability to do great work.
Okay, so we've got another question here, which I think is quite an important one, and I know that you work through Ocado through COVID and the whole work from home sort of transition. But let's not trigger PTSD by going back there. But the fact is, and this question is very good because they are mandated to all work from home in their creative team. There is no office time, and as a result, the team's getting more geographically dispersed. This is in the United States, I think.
Yeah.
And so there is no scope for there's no budget to fly into a city and get together.
Yeah.
How on earth do you watch for the signs of overwork and burnout when you literally are dipping in and out on calls with people? How do you tackle that one?
Well, I will say it's much harder. I think you've got to be very clear with the leadership team of the creative team. So maybe in a small team that's just you. Maybe in a larger team like I had, you have direct reports who are leaders in their own right, each with a pod of people. Are they checking in regularly? Are you having weekly catch-ups with your staff? And actually, I think particularly at a time when you're hybrid working, I think you should really be meeting with your staff every week.
Every week, yeah.
Yeah, even if it's just 20 minutes, just check.
But you're talking about a non-work call. You're talking about
I'm talking about pastoral care. I'm talking about checking and making sure they're okay. And I have a one-to-one form that I use with my team at the moment. It's a very small team, but first question I ask is, how are you doing? 1 to 10. Just how are you doing this week? And that is to start that conversation. How are you doing?
It's sort of a net promoter score, isn't it? It is that kind of conversation.
It is, yeah. And looking at stuff almost like on a RAG status basis. Is this person okay? Are they in the middle? Are they not doing so well? And just being very aware of that as a manager and talking about that, asking those questions. And if you don't do that, you're quite likely to get a surprise at some point.
Yeah, you're going to miss it. Yeah.
So that's how I would do that. And I would also try and make sure there are opportunities for the team to meet up just informally. We used to do a thing on a Friday, I think, at Ocado during COVID. And it's just one example. That was my period running a team. But we used to just meet up for a chat. And there were a lot of people on the call, and not everyone made it every week, and it was optional. But just meant some of the people who were at home and didn't have anyone else to talk to, and maybe in lockdown were isolated, got to speak to someone else and just have a chat with their colleagues without going, have we got that marketing brief finished?
Well, that leads nicely to another question here. It's probably going to have to be our last one, to be honest, before we wrap up.
Yeah,
but now you may not want to answer this because it could be quite a provocative question. I'm not sure if it's been put there provocatively, but do you think overwork and long hours culture is a generational thing? In my last in-house agency, I saw leaders and more people working longer hours, with Generation X getting out of the door on time and taking lunch. Right, not a problem, but there seemed to be a generational difference. I was from an ad agency background in the late 90s where we did mega long hours. So it was all right for me when I was their age. Why is it not all right for them? I'm not sure if that's what the question's asking, but what do you think?
That's interesting because I'm Gen X and I always assumed I'd just die at my desk working.
Well, that's why we got to stop a hard stop, because you're just going to log off, aren't you, in 5 minutes?
Yeah,
unlike me, as a whatever I am, boomer.
Are you a boomer?
I think I might be just about. I could be, yeah.
I don't know. I mean, like, generational's interesting, but I've learned loads from millennials and Gen Zs who are, again, different from each other about looking after myself mentally, about actually taking cues from them because they want to go and walk the dog at 5. Well, that doesn't mean that they're slackers. It just means they want to go and walk the dog at 5, or they've got a yoga class or whatever. And yes, you can kind of laugh at that and say it's all about, like everybody just wants to have a nice soft life. But no, actually, they're prioritizing themselves as well. And that means that they should be in better shape to do the work the next day.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's a balance. I'm not sure there's a generational thing here, really. I think it's down to individuals. I've worked with Gen Zs who are some of the hardest grafters I've ever worked with, and I've worked with Gen Xers who are laziest. And I get it, but I definitely don't look back fondly to the good old days when we all worked like 80-hour weeks. So,
no, nor do I, to be perfectly honest. Well, Michael, that wraps it up. I think suffice it to say we've had fantastic attendance. I can see all the statistics here.
yeah,
Thank you all for staying the course and listening to what we have to say. Here's how you contact us. We do these webinars and seminars. Henry Stewart, thank you so much for hosting this for us. And if anyone wants to link in with us or reach out to us directly, Michael does actually work with a number of creative teams, as I say here, and in the United States. And I think you're always good to hear from people on LinkedIn, and perhaps jump on calls and hear what they have to say.
I've done mentoring and coaching as well. Like, just if you've got a question that you want to ask, please just reach out. I'd hate it to go unasked.
Yeah.
So.
And equally, if you do decide that outsourcing is going to help your team focus on what they do best, then by all means get in touch. It's what we do. We work with in-house agencies and creative teams with the sole purpose of enabling them to perform at their best, and they do that by being very creative. So once again, those are the contact details, but I'm sure there'll be follow-up emails from Henry Stewart with more information. But with that, Theo, I think it's back to you, but thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Michael and Robert. That was a really insightful session. Just to remind everyone, the link to access the recording of this session will be sent to all participants tomorrow. And if you'd like to find out more about upcoming events, courses, and webinars, please visit the Henry Stewart website. Also, don't forget that Creative Operations New York takes place on May 16th. So please do check that out.
Michael will be talking at that event as well. So you can hear Michael himself in the flesh.
We look forward to it. And thank you everyone again for attending today's session. And we look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.